Hello, hello. Yeah. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Attack Sound Design in a Gameplay World. Uh, Hi, I'm Dani. I'm a technical sound designer. My background is in game design. Also, my education is in game design. So it's kind of the lens that I view sound. And previously, I worked as a gameplay scripter. More on that later. Um, what is a technical game designer at Larian? So I do game design, I do some sound design, I code, and I live inside our middleware, in this case, Wise. Larian, how many people here heard about Larian, know about Larian? All right, perfect. So Larian is a company originally founded in Belgium, mainly focused on RPG games. We have offices in Ireland, in Russia, and in Canada, Quebec. Now, some of Larian games include things like Divine Divinity, Dragon Commander, Divinity 2. The more recent games, the Divinity Original Sin and Divinity Original Sin 2. And currently, we're working on Baldur's Gate 3. No pressure. Today, I want to talk to you about Divinity Original Sin 2. Divinity Original Sin 2 is a big RPG, over 100 hours. And it's mainly focused on player agency, which basically giving the player freedom. And the way we achieve this is through systemic design. So we create systems. If the player can think about it, they probably can do it in our systems. On this project, I worked as a gameplay scripter. And this is kind of the framework that we're going to be viewing some sound implementation from that perspective, from a game design perspective. And there's three different examples that we're going to take a look at. We're going to take a look at support and feedback implementation, basically supporting a certain mechanic and using sound as feedback. We're going to be looking at narrative-driven implementation, basically when the sound is connected to the narrative, and sound-driven mechanics, so where the game mechanics came from the sound itself. First of all, the support and feedback. So support and sound plays a very big role in giving feedback on certain mechanics in the games. It's a very useful tool to communicate to the player very specific information. The specific example I want to talk to you about today is traps. So I want to talk about traps in fantasy. Like in a fantasy games, usually if you go to a dungeon, you expect certain traps. A good trap design should be predictable but not obvious. So when you enter a dungeon, you think like, I think there should be a trap here, and then you go look and you find a trap. It makes you feel smart, and this is by design. It's the same thing of like with looter shooters, of like when you enter a room, think like, there should be a chest here. You find a chest. And when I'm saying predictable and not obvious, we should lead the player to know when to expect to pay attention, and to pay attention to the world visually and sonically. The specific example from the game that I want to give is in Ark Sewer. That's at the end of the game. There's those sewers. Inside those sewers, there are a group of thieving kids. Now, those kids have their headquarters trapped, of course. And the trap that we came up with was a teddy bear trap. So we placed those teddy bears, and those teddy bears basically act as proximity mines. And let's take a look at example. Let's look at an example how it works. So basically, you come close to the bear, and it explodes. Now, the thing is, it's a two-stage system. So the first system, it's two radiuses. The first radius activates the bear, and the activation is being communicated with a flip of a switch, and the gears start turning. And then the second stage, that's when the bear goes into explosion mode. Now, in this mode, the gears start turning faster, and we indicate to the player now it's time to move away. There is a 1 second of time before the bear actually explodes to give the player time to move away. And the transition between the loops is also being communicated with a certain click. So that smooths out the transition between those two stages. So now, after we established that, so we taught the player how this bear behaves and in a safe environment and what to expect. Now we can start playing. Now we can have some fun and start playing with the player's expectation. So in this example, we can see the teddy bear sitting on a barrel of oil. Now, it's very obvious to see it because the camera is focused on it, but during gameplay, you really need to pay attention. And you've seen, and usually the camera is also a little bit lower. And you see a ladder, you click on the ladder, and by the time you're all the way up, it's too late. So now this was a visual example, but we can also play. We can also play with those expectations using sound. And of course, by the time you're down, it's too late. A small thing that I also want to point out is in this example is the context of the sounds. So when we were designing those traps, the first sounds that went into the game were, because it's a proximity mine, were digital beeps that felt completely off in the world and didn't fit. So then we were exploring, okay, what does make this bear explode? So probably there's some gears turning inside, and the context of the sound design anchored it in the world and made it part of the world. And in this example, so basically we were able to teach the player what to look out for, and when to pay attention, and we teach that feedback through throughout the level and with the placement of those specific bears. And then, of course, we play with the expectations and have fun with it. Now, the second part is narrative-driven sounds. So what are narrative-driven sounds is when the sound is actually an element of the narrative. What that means is usually it can mean a certain speech that you need to speak in a certain place, like or a curse word, a forbidden word, or some music piece that has been forgotten throughout time and you need to assemble it through the narrative. Or some special sound effects, like a special whistle that you need to play a certain in a certain way in a certain spot. As an example of this, I want to present to you Lose.
All my life, I've been a performer, a musician, beloved and celebrated by all. But I have a secret. I'm also a playground for sprites and spirits and worse. The voice that rings inside me now is darker than any that came before. Almost caused a bunch of my fans to rip each other to pieces. But you can trust me. I've got this under control. Step 1, find out who or what is trying to take control of my mind. Step 2, make it sorry it ever tried.
Okay, so in this case, Lose is one of our origin characters. Origin characters are special characters that you can play as or recruit, and all of them has a big overarching story that evolves throughout the game. Because of Luce's background, each of those characters has an origin music theme that is composed and composed specifically for them, and elements of that theme reoccurring throughout the game. Because of Luce's special origin, as she is a performer, and her ties into music, that means that we scripted special origin moments just for her. And here is an example of those moments. So at the beginning of the game, Lose can meet an old friend that will recognize her from the days that she used to perform, and they can perform a song together. Now that song is part of Luce's origin theme song.
dark. Come to me, the night is long. Sing for me, I'll sing along. Sing for me, oh sing for me.
Ha! That was great. You still got it, kid.
So after that, Laszlo gives that loot to Lose, and now the player has this loot in their inventory, and they can play it with Lose at any given moment in the game. When they play it...
Well, since I had one of these in my hands, I wonder if I can still play.
Destroy.
What? No, not now, no. Leave me alone.
So yeah, the voice in her head made her destroy the loot, and then the player can pick up the broken loot and carry it with them in their inventory. Now, this is like the 3-hour mark of the game. Around the 20-25-hour mark of the game, the player can meet an NPC that will offer them to fix the loot. Now, the NPC will ask what kind of wood to use to fix the loot. Each wood has a different effect that Losu can apply on the entire party. We also wanted to have different tunes for each one of those loots, but scope didn't manage scope-wise.
Ah, 'tis done then.
But when Losu plays the loot a second time...
Destroy it! Now! No!
She breaks it again.
Damn it!
This time more painful. And this can happen during combat. This can happen at any given time. And then at the end of the game, Lose goes through her entire journey and she finds the sources of what prevents her from playing the music. She deals with it, and then at this moment, she gets a special type of loot. Now that loot, the player carrying their inventory, and again, they can play it at any given time, and that will trigger the full theme song of Lose's origin. And this is how it looks like.
Listen, do you hear it? Listen, do you feel it? Listen, I'm calling you. Listen, you do know me. Listen, swing and roll me. Listen, I'm calling you.
So with sprinkling those moments throughout the game, we were able to basically narratively build up this origin story and basically build up to the reward, which was the music theme of this character. Now, seeing online, the reception for this was very good. Like, people were saying that that's the best, one of the best rewards they ever got in a RPG quest line, better than a fancy magic item or bags of experience, and the player can then take that loot, and basically they have this toy to play with, and they can trigger it at any given moment in the game. Now the third example is sound-driven mechanics. So what are game mechanics? So game mechanics are the tools that we give to the player to interact with our games, and what sound-driven game mechanics means are unique sound-driven actions. So there are actions that really drives from the sound. As an example of that is probably very famous example. In every stealth game, you will go to a guard, you throw a pebble, and they're like, oh, what's over there? And they'll go and investigate it. And this type of actions also need to be contextualized in the world, and because we're building digital worlds, we need to create all those rules from scratch. So I'm pretty sure if you go to the security guard in Cégep de Drummondville and you throw a pebble in front of them, they won't go and investigate it. Like, those types of behaviors are unique for each game, and each game needs to think about what does sound mean in their world and what is the context of that sound. A lot of the times, it also means to think about the reaction in the world to the sound. as an example, there's the Wanley Mandrake. So this is again going into the City of Arcs, which is the end of the game. There's this dude called Cam. He's a really rich noble, and he has a garden with a plateau of weird plants. One of the plants is a weird-looking plant in a glass container, and let's see what happens.
An inscription at the terrarium's base identifies its contents as a wailing mandrake, a species.
Gods, make it stop!
So you break the glass, and this plant starts screaming. And this was literally the first thing that got scripted. So the sound was scripted first. And then we start thinking, well, this plant is screaming. What can you do with it? Well, you can pick up this plant. So of course, when you pick it up, the plant goes into your inventory. It doesn't stop screaming. It keeps screaming inside your inventory. So of course, we apply a filter on it. But now that means you have all this noise around you. That means you probably, if you try to speak to someone, they won't hear you. So we apply a silenced status on the player.
Holy Mother of Divine, that's loud! I won't do much sneaking with this in my pocket.
So the silent status was already existing as part of our gameplay systems. That basically makes that spellcasters cannot cast any spells. But if you cannot, when you speak, people cannot hear you. Also, that means you cannot perceive sounds because of all the noise. So we made a unique status because of it called deaf. Now, deaf means that one of your sensory inputs is missing. So as a result, you have less chance to dodge, and you hit worse because you have less sensory input. There's less chance of you dodging an attack or hitting someone. And on top of that, we also lowered the wits. Wits is the stat in the game that is in charge of perception. This is the stat that allows you to find hidden compartments and hidden secrets and everything hidden in the game. So we lowered that because you're too busy with that overwhelming noise around you that you're less perceptive of your world. Now, every single plant in the Divinity game you can consume. Every different plant have a different effect. So we were thinking, okay, you have the screaming plant. What happens when you eat it?
Sorry about that, but it had to be done.
So we thought it would be cool. We thought it would be cool to give the player a unique skill that allows them to scream like the plant, and then when they scream, they can set this new deaf status on their enemies and make them dodge worse and hit worse and less perceptive of the world. Now, if the player doesn't consume the plant, they keep it in their inventory, still makes a lot of noise. They can then go back into the town square where there's like a lot of merchants and a lot of people. Now, it would be weird to walk around the town square with a screaming plant in your pocket and like everyone is going to be reacting like everything is normal. So as a result of it, we added a new world reaction that reacts to being noisy. So when you walk around the world, people will react to you having the plant in your pocket.
Rarities, remnants, and relics. Buying and selling.
So yes. I also want to show a playthrough of this entire sequence of a streamer, Koch Carnage. We just really enjoy his facial expressions.
An inscription at the terrarium's base identifies its contents as a wailing mandrake, a species you've not heard of before now.
Examine the plant.
Not...
God, make it stop! Holy Mother of Divine, that's loud! I won't do much sneaking with this in my pocket.
What is this thing? Eat it!
Sorry about that, but it had to be done.
What? That is so cool!
So this is an example where the sound was the first thing that got added, and then all the mechanics and all the game design came after that. So it came out of a context of the sound, and this is something that really interests me to bring together game design and sound design, and where does that realm live, and basically questioning the role of sound design in games. Thank you very much. Questions?
First of all, really great presentation. Thank you a lot. Do you find that there's accessibility issues when you use audio as the primary type of feedback? So for example, the bear, I didn't notice any kind of visual feedback that it was going to explode. It was only the clicking sound from the gears. Is there any kind of accessibility problems for people who A, just don't use sound, boo to them, or B, who actually have a hearing impairment?
Absolutely. This is why it's support and feedback. This is where sound should support the feedback being visual. And the bear has his eyes lights out, but on the perspective of the camera you cannot see it very well. And indeed like the feedback should be visual as well. And this is why the support is there.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Anything else? Come on. We got a microphone. You get to hold it. And talk into it and ask a question. Out.
You were part of the scripting team, therefore, and you have a consciousness about sound, right? Yeah. And therefore, you thought of mechanics like this, like the plant that creates sounds. But in games where you're not part of the scripting team, do you have ways that you could incite maybe, or like direct scripters towards like developing that kind of mechanics, maybe?
Yes, and actually. Like I was always a voice to make people think about sound, and I was always walking around in the design team. I was walking around the studio saying like, "Hey, think about the sound. Don't forget about the sound. Don't forget about the sound." And yes, half of the time I hear that like that's half of the battle. But I find that usually it works. It works really well when you don't tell, you show. You show why people should think about the sound. Why sound is important. Why it's such a key element, and then people people see it and realize it, and then people will come to you, and then people will come and like, hey, like I have this thing I'm working on, like can you take a look and like maybe need sound, and the minute that clicks, I think this is where collaboration and communication comes in.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. My question is, how do you decide the positioning of different sounds in your game? I mean, when it's like a top-down game like that, you may want to have some feedback sounds like very present, even though that's not their real position in the world. And I was just interested how you like decide what to play where, and like if you have a certain radius of like, okay, the sound is too far away, we won't play that anymore, and that sort of stuff.
Yes. So on this project, I was more on the scripting side. So I will try to answer it as to the best of my abilities. But basically, using of attenuation curves and how sounds are audible, like along distances, and the fact that in the game our listener actually for this reason is not placed on the camera, is placed between the character and the camera to allow that presence as if it's the character, like that you're hearing from the character perspective, but still get the correct feedback from the environment around you. Because if it was on the camera, then that usually sounds indeed will be too far away and you'll be too distant. So it's finding the listener position and attenuation curves. All right. I think that's... All right. All right. Thank you very much. And thanks.